A new wide receivers coach has been hired. Nearly a dozen Ohio State players are in the transfer portal, and some visits are already scheduled over the weekend for the Buckeyes, who are wasting no time turning the page from the Cotton Bowl and into 2026. Welcome to Snap Judgments. He is Jeremy Birmingham. I am Austin Ward. Well, that's a lot of stuff that we couldn't get into the beat on Friday morning, Birm.
It's pretty crazy. Do you remember? I mean, it was what, 5-6 years ago? There actually was an off season.
No, that doesn't sound right to me.
It's just insane. But this is football now. I mean, it's out of control. Let's just preface this entire show by saying that the transfer portal is out of control. It's like it doesn't make any sense. Please, college football. If there's someone out there who can save it, please save my sport that I love. Please.
I don't know who that would be. I don't know if that's going to happen, but it doesn't matter right now because all Ohio State can do is adapt accordingly, and they have already done that. I want to start because there's going to be a lengthy conversation about what the Buckeyes would need to do with the roster, but the folks leading that's got to be the biggest news out of the immediate fallout. Ohio State did not delay in replacing the wide receivers coach. That vacancy created by Brian Hartline's departure to South Florida. Now, Cortez Hankton is on the way. He was formerly at LSU and Georgia before that. He does not strike me, Birm, as someone who can maybe take on the play calling duties. So that also opens up another conversation. But at least in terms of the full-time accountable recruiting position spots on the staff, that is now complete for Ohio State. I think that we're going to have to discuss coordinator and play calling roles later on, but Cortez Hankton has a chance to make an impact, at least with a position group.
Yeah, and he was the co-offensive coordinator at LSU the last 2 years, passing game coordinator at LSU for 2 years before that, passing game coordinator at Georgia for 2 years before that. So, I mean, he is a guy that has some experience in that role, but that's certainly not why Ohio State is bringing him in. As you see on the screen, if you're watching on 97.1 The Fan or 10 TV or 10 TV Plus, he's from New Orleans. You love that sort of profile if you're Ohio State to go down and get a guy from the South who can maybe make some inroads in the recruiting space down there. Ironically, when you talk to or listen to people who have followed his career and his time at Georgia and at LSU, they certainly don't speak to his recruiting chops, which, is, I guess, sort of antithetical to what we would expect Ohio State to be looking for in this hire to replace a guy like Brian Hartline. But ultimately, what you're getting here is a really good relationship builder. Sam Spiegelman, who's one of my closest friends in the industry, is from New Orleans, has worked with Cortez Hankton for the last 10 years or so, getting to know him. Sam says that Cortez is an absolutely elite relationship builder, a guy that, a lot like Brian Hartline, would identify players very early in the process and then narrow in on those guys, and those would be his guys. So, and that includes players like Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas, who are two of the best receivers in the NFL. George Pickens, who's one of the best receivers in the NFL for the Cowboys, although a bit of a head case. Ladd McConkey, who Hankton went and not just evaluated and developed, but turned into a highly productive NFL receiver. So, you look at those teams and the work he did, it's not the same as Ohio State. So we need to be clear about that. Number one, LSU, especially in the Brian Kelly era, was very vocal that they weren't going to pay players that well. And so what we saw out of Hankton, even in the last 2 years, he had Tristan Keys, the number one receiver in the country by some folks in the class of 2026. He had him committed for 6 months. He had DeCorian Moore, the number one receiver in the class of 2025, recruited and committed to LSU for over a year before Oregon came in and stole him away with big money, and Tristan Keys, who Tennessee stole away with big money at the end of that cycle. So he's won those battles in the short term, but didn't have the support from the university to really conclude those fights. I think he'll get that at Ohio State. But the biggest thing really is his ability to come into Columbus, build relationships with the receivers, and develop guys like Mylan Graham, Quincy Porter, Phillip Bell, et cetera. Obviously, you don't have a lot of work to do building relationship-wise with Jeremiah Smith or Brandon Innes, but you're going to be able to come in and help give those guys a different look, a different perspective than Brian Hartline and Devin Jordan did. I think, for me, that's one of the interesting things. Is like, what does this mean for Devin Jordan? Is Devin someone that Cortez is going to retain, or does he have his own guy in mind for an assistant? But I think it's a hire that will have some people shaking their head because it doesn't seem like Ryan Day really looked anywhere else. Cortez Hankton interviewed I think it was 3+ weeks ago. And clearly the Buckeyes were waiting until the season was over to make the announcement official, which they did basically as soon as they got home on Thursday from Dallas. So we'll see. It's mixed reviews from the people, but that have had the fan bases where he's coached But is there ever Ohio State fans have been bad-mouthing Brian Hartline for the last month. So,
well, yeah, I mean, that sounds like very much the expectation and the standard of any major program. And I don't think that Cortez Hankton would have been coaching as long as he did at Georgia or LSU if he didn't have earned credibility with decision makers. And I would imagine that you look at his experience with those two SEC programs and with the quality and caliber of wide receivers that he has coached and then sent on to the NFL level, there'd be a lot of folks around the country at both levels who would, I think, vouch for Cortez Hankton. And, if you look at that, who has become somebody that has had the ear of Ryan Day and helped, I think Nick Saban would probably have seen Cortez Hankton over the last decade or so. I wouldn't be surprised if that had been part of the conversation in any way, shape, or form, which I think got to this quick resolution for Ohio State and for Ryan Day to make this hire. But that only addresses half of the issue. And as I said, even though Cortez Hankton has, to my understanding, interviewed for some coordinator jobs, both at the college football level and at the NFL level, he's not been a play caller like at this level. He's not worked directly with Ryan Day and with the Ohio State offense, obviously, because he is just now getting to Columbus. So does he solve the void with the play caller? What does this mean if you are full with countable coaches who can recruit? Does that still give Ohio State an opportunity and Ryan Day an opportunity to go pursue someone that, as we have said, fits the Brian Daboll or Joe Moorhead type role that we think he needs? I still come out of the Cotton Bowl, I feel more strongly than ever that Ohio State has to pursue someone, a veteran, someone like Bill O'Brien or Chip Kelly, the way that it was 2 years ago. I understand why Brian Hartline was given and earned the promotion a year ago. But if you're looking at the results, especially in the college football playoff or in the Big Ten championship game, those auditions I don't think worked for promoting Billy Fessler, Keenan Bailey, and or Tyler Bowen, or some combination of the three. Now, how does that work mathematically, financially, NCAA rules-wise? I truly don't know. I don't have the answer to that, but I don't think that Hankton solves it.
I don't either. And I'm going to give you some names as to why I think Ohio State still, despite the fact that I know there is still discussion inside of the Woody Hayes Athletic Center about potentially elevating Keenan Bailey or Billy Fessler or Tyler Bowen or anybody in that building. I'm going to give you some names as to why I think that shouldn't happen. Texas Longhorns, Indiana Hoosiers, Iowa Hawkeyes, Michigan Wolverines, Oregon Ducks, USC Trojans. Those are all the teams Ohio State plays next year. And I don't think you can consider going into that schedule in what is now going to be a fairly pivotal year for the Ohio State football program with a first-time play caller, period. So either Ryan Day is going to have to bite the bullet and say, I'm going to call plays again, which I think is bad for the program. I think bad for the football team, bad for Ryan Day's development as a coach, or Ryan Day is going to have to go out and hire somebody else. And so the question is, does the alignment of hiring someone else mean Billy Fessler, Tyler Bowen, Carlos Lachlan, or Keenan Bailey has to move on? Because you can't have more than 10 countable recruiting coaches. Or does Ryan Day completely change the way that college football has been viewed and run in the last, 100 years, and bring in an offensive coordinator who does not count as a full-time recruiting coach, because college football is allowing you to have as many on-field coaches as you want. Not only 10 can go out on the road and recruit, but what precludes Ohio State from hiring somebody like Brian Daboll? Again, I'm not saying Brian Daboll. I want to make sure we got a lot of people excited about Brian Daboll a month ago when we said that he was the prototype that we were thinking about. But if you can hire a
Brian Daboll-like person.
Yes. If a Brian Daboll-like person is available that you can hire and say, hey, we're going to give you $4 million a year. All you have to do is come in and coordinate our offense Monday through Sunday. You never have to recruit. You just have to be a wizard. And is that possible? And I think it is possible. Obviously, it requires a huge commitment from Ohio State financially, because as we've talked about for the last 2.5 months, there's going to be a major need to increase the salary pool on the defensive side of the ball just by Matt Patricia needing a hefty extension and raise in order to make sure that he's locked in for a few years. So what do you do? Because I don't think Ryan Day wants any more turnover on the current staff. So the question is there any other way to accomplish that and bring in an outside offense coordinator, other than saying we're going to hire exclusively an offensive coordinator and he is not going to be part of the 10 countable coaches. And I don't think there is. So it's going to be a commitment, not from Ryan Day necessarily to find someone he trusts, but a commitment from Ohio State's athletic department and Ross Bjork to say, we're going to give you this, because I think that's ultimately what has to happen. Otherwise, you enter the 2026 season with a major, major question mark at offensive coordinator and play calling.
Yeah. And look, I understand that those decisions, Ryan Day has, I think, largely earned the benefit of the doubt. He has improved dramatically over the tenure of his career when it comes to hiring coaches and making a plan for the future. And I think that the most aggressive approach has to be taken here. And if that is looking at the rules of engagement of college football and saying that there's nothing that precludes this coordinator spot and mandates that they must be recruiters, take advantage of that and do that. We've already, so there, I think there's this perception that Ohio State has not taken full advantage of the unlimited coaching cap when they have 3 people coaching the offensive line. They had Brian Hartline and Devin Jordan before the coordinator promotion a year ago. They have they have 3 defensive line coach last, 2 guys assisting Larry Johnson last year. Ohio State has been more aggressive than anybody else in pushing the envelope and finding that as the way that they develop a competitive edge that other programs can't do. And I think when you're looking at the staff alignment, they have really good position coaches. But what separated Ohio State and Ryan Day in the coaching cycle 2 years ago, and even last year with Matt Patricia to a lesser extent, but when Ryan Day knew that he needed to give up play calling and decided to commit to that fully, the 2 names that he pursued were Bill O'Brien first, which he did land for 2 weeks, and then Chip Kelly as a sitting head coach at UCLA. So yes, those 2 both counted towards the 10 full-time position coaches, but that was an established veteran play caller that he could say, my fingerprints are off of this. Still going to be involved on offense, still going to be involved on defense, still going to be involved on special teams in a limited capacity, but I'm going to be the CEO. He has that without question 100% fully with Matt Patricia, that he does not, I don't think, need to step and foot to a defensive meeting right now. But that was clearly not the case on offense, not just in the postseason, but I think for the duration of this year with Brian Hartline. That move didn't work. But Ryan Day has already shown that he knows the answer to that question because he did it 2 years ago.
Right. And it makes sense that he didn't want to try to bring in another outside voice on offense after a national championship, after all the continuity talk and everything else that had happened last year. And it had been 2 years of Brian Hartline learning under Ryan Day and Chip Kelly and trying, but clearly, as you said, for whatever reason, it didn't seem to have the chemistry that people expected it to. But again, to me, this comes down to not Ryan Day. It comes down to Ohio State. Is the Ohio State athletic department going to be willing to allocate another $4 million to an outside coordinator who is not going to be one of the full-time coaches? And it seems like pennies when you're talking about, okay, so if you lose Coach X and it's $750,000, so the difference is what, $3.25 million. Todd Monken, let's just throw his name out there as another NFL guy who I'm just thinking about, right? I think he makes like $3 million as the offensive coordinator for the Baltimore Ravens. Was a really successful offense coordinator at Georgia. Led them to the back-to-back national championships, including working with Cortez Hankton. Why not make a call to a guy like that and say, hey, we can give you $4 million for 3 years and you're going to come in here and just coordinate? Like, I think that the possibilities are endless. We obviously are entering an era of college football where money isn't real. So who cares? Like, just spend what you want. As long as there's no salary cap on coaches, as long as there's no cap number on coaches, you can do anything you want. And Ohio State still has the resources and the lure to bring in pretty much anybody. And you wonder, is there a single NFL offensive coordinator, currently sitting NFL offensive coordinator, that Ohio State couldn't pay? There's not, because the highest paid offensive coordinator in the league was Chip Kelly, and the Raiders doubled up like what was anyone's normal salary for that position by hiring him. Clearly that didn't work. I think Ohio State is in a prime position to do whatever they want. And I know that there's people who will push back on this notion because there is a very interesting dichotomy inside of Ryan Day. There's a very, very stubborn Ryan Day, but there's also a very, very realistic Ryan Day that realizes, hey, something isn't right here and I need to fix it. And I think that we are going to see which of those versions of him run into each other over the next couple weeks.
Yeah, well, especially because that's not the only thing on his plate. As the transfer portal opened earlier on Friday, there were already half a dozen Ohio State players who had announced their intentions to move on from the Buckeyes, and then more confirmed it once the portal actually opened. So here's what we've got as of this moment, which remains very subject to change. And if you're watching on 97.1 The Fan, 10 TV, or 10 TV Plus, you can already see this. But Lincoln Kienholz, who we talked to earlier in the week, that seemed very clear what he was going to be doing in this postseason once the opportunity arrived. He's in the portal. James Peoples and Sam Dixon in the backfield. Bryson Rogers, who had already left the team in the middle of December. Demarion Witten. Jelani Thurman, who had his agent announced shortly after the game on Wednesday night. C.J. Hicks, Logan George, Dominic Kirks from the defensive line. In the secondary, Bryce West, and the kicker that Ohio State did add in the transfer portal last year, who did not beat out Jaden Fielding, Jackson Corville, is back in the portal. Out of that entire list, Berm, and maybe I can be accused of being too naive or too trusting, whatever. I think this decision from C.J. Hicks is the only one that qualifies to me as a surprise.
Yeah, I mean, I don't really understand it, but I guess everyone has to make their own decisions, and everything that CJ had said when he decided to redshirt back in October was that he was intending to use that time to get better and learn how to play defensive end in this Ohio State system in return for next year. Maybe that's still a possibility. I doubt it. But the simple truth here is this: Ohio State, if you run up and down the Buckeyes roster, like, it is not senior laden. You have obviously some big time players that are leaving to the NFL draft, or early entry guys like Carnell Tate and Caleb Downs and Arvell Reese and maybe Caden McDonald, but there's not a lot of guys leaving on this team. And so when you have signed 28 incoming freshmen, which is the most Ohio State's ever signed, that was designed and done intentionally, which is to know that there are going to be players like Bryce West, for example, who to me is the surprise of this group. CJ Hicks, again, we were given the impression that he was not entering the redshirt year for this purpose, but it's turned out to be that way. Malik Hartford not being on this list by this point is more of a surprise to me than CJ Hicks being on it, if I'm being honest. But again, many things can still happen. A lot of time left, but there's a handful of guys here, and we'll just run down this list. And I don't want to single anybody out because I do understand why anybody on this list is making this decision for themselves. But a guy like James Peoples, for example, got passed up by 2 freshmen this year. If he wants an opportunity to play, he's going to have to probably go somewhere else, and he's going to do that. Same thing with Lincoln Kienholz. You can understand that. A guy like Dom Kirks got passed up by Zion Grady, got passed up by Bo Atkinson. Understand. Bryce West, I think, is just a guy that maybe believes heading into his 3rd season at Ohio State, he was the presumptive starter as the nickel safety. And I think it maybe feels like, hey, I should just get more money because I'm the presumptive starter. And that's just not going to work at Ohio State. Like, you are not the presumptive starter. You are a guy that played a little bit of football this year, and you can't just walk in and demand X amount of money without earning it on the field. So the Buckeyes know that they have to restock their defense. They're going to be extremely aggressive in the transfer portal, especially on defense, but no one on that defense, with the exception of Edric Houston or Kenyatta Jackson, if he returns, or Jermaine Matthews and Jalen McClain, like, there's no jobs. There's nobody who has a set job at this point. And that includes Devin Sanchez. That includes Peyton Pierce. That includes anyone else. Like, you don't have a job next year. So if you're expecting to walk into the Ohio State offices and say, hey, well, I'm going to come back if you give me this amount of money, well, then it's free agency, and Ohio State's going to see if they can find someone better.
Yeah. And we've also seen a lot increasingly across college football that these players who are going in, and I'm talking generally, I'm not talking specific to Ohio State, although there are examples I think that we could come up with that say you go to your current team and you say, this is what I want to stay. And then you find out that that's not what your market value is. That actually, I think, directly happened with Bryson Rogers the first time that he went into the transfer portal. So some of this stuff is negotiating, it's leverage, it's misunderstanding negotiations and misunderstanding leverage. That is the unfortunate reality of the way that the transfer portal has worked so far. I think it's great that players can earn name, image, and likeness money. But I think it can get distorted in a hurry what you think other teams are going to be able to pay. And it is There's a lot of reasons for that. But Ohio State, for all of the criticism, for all of the summertime scrutiny that we gave to how much they would pay or not pay to high school seniors, they are at the top of the market for retaining their roster. And if they tell you no, most cases, you're not going to find a better deal. And I'm not just saying that as a word of wisdom or a threat or whatever else to anyone who's considering it. It's just what the reality is. And Ohio State's not going to compromise its own salary cap, which I know people hate. Oh, the Buckeyes make more money than anyone else. They should just pay whatever it takes for every coach. You and I already advocated for that, for expanding that with an offensive coordinator. They should do that with their roster too. That's not a good way to do business. And, I think that's what's going to be a fascinating dynamic in the weeks ahead, because Birm, there are already players that are wanting that opportunity and planning to visit the Buckeyes right now.
Yeah, and it's going to start today. It's already underway. The reality is, you bring up a good point. If you go to the office and Ohio State tells you no, you're probably not going to get a better offer somewhere else. But it's also a reminder that if you walk into the office and you say, I need this amount of money, and Ohio State tells you no, then you're not in the plans, because the Buckeyes are going to keep who they want to keep. And that's why, the primary conversations right now are about guys like Caden McDonald and Kenyatta Jackson, as we talked about on Friday morning's episode of The Beat. Like, you have to figure out what it takes to keep those guys. If Caden McDonald is getting a second-round NFL draft grade right now, Ohio State needs to be able to put together a pretty lucrative package to make sure that he has a real conversation about staying. Kenyatta Jackson, if he's getting a fourth-round grade, he needs to be staying at Ohio State. So now there is the other side of that for a guy like Kenyatta Jackson. Guess what? Other schools can go off after him. So it's not just Ohio State. So clearly, you hope guys that are potential Blocko wearers and stuff like that will weigh their legacy and all that stuff a little bit more than money. But if you're a player, again, I'm going to bring up Bryce West because I think it's an important one to say. There are a lot of guys around the country who've played a lot more football than Bryce West that Ohio State can pay less money or the same amount of money that Bryce West is asking, who are more likely to come in and be ready to contribute without the hiccups and the continued learning curve that Bryce West needs. Now, Bryce has an advantage in that he spent a year in Matt Patricia's defense, but ultimately, you have to know what your worth is. And Ohio State has learned pretty solidly over the last couple of years that a lot of these conversations are agents attempting to get Ohio State to negotiate against itself. And the Buckeyes are smart enough not to do that. Now, again, they're going to need to spend money. There's no doubt about it. They know they need to spend up front. They know they're going to need to get active when it comes to the edge rushers. That's why today, Friday, Chaz Coleman, the Penn State defensive end edge rusher, is visiting Columbus. Tennessee and LSU are reportedly pushing to try and make that more difficult. Is that because the agent's just putting out names? We don't know, because I'm going to tell you right now, there's conversation floating around on Friday morning about Pitt linebacker Rasheem Biles, who's a Pickerington Central product, a former teammate of Sonny Styles at Pick Central, who I loved him as a high school player. I thought Ohio State should go get him. They didn't. They let him go to Pitt. He's developed into an all-ACC linebacker. He's asking a lot of money, and I know that I've seen reports on Friday morning that he's going to visit Ohio State on Monday. I've been told pretty explicitly he's not, and that it's just the agent trying to get Ohio State involved so that other schools spend more money. I don't think he's going to visit. But we do see Antonio O'Berry, who's a defensive end who originally signed with Tiffin, the Tiffin Dragons. He's from Dayton, and then went to play at Gardner Webb, and he's like a 50-year guy, 6'6", 250 pounds. Like, that's the type of profile Ohio State's looking for, a guy that maybe you can build a roster similar, which is, I'm going to say, the craziest thing I've ever said.
Oh my gosh. No, I'm not. Give me a second.
You have to be willing to build a roster like Indiana.
Oh my God.
I know.
You did it.
I had this thought on Thursday night, and you can tell me if you think I'm crazy.
I was going to do a spit take, but this is my computer. So.
Am I crazy? There is a developing pattern in college football that takes me back to like 2006 college basketball. And if you got a bunch of dudes who are 23, 24 years old playing against a bunch of 18-year-olds, I don't care what ranking those 18-year-olds were in high school, unless they're freaks like Jeremiah Smith, right? Unless they're from a different solar system. Does it matter how highly ranked an 18-year-old is when you're playing against a 24-year-old?
Not generally.
I don't think it does. And so I think that there is a recalibration in Columbus of saying, let's go find highly productive, experienced players from around the country. Indiana, look at their team. Like, they are kicking people's asses. And they are not doing that with guys that people have ever heard of. They whipped Alabama's ass physically. Just whipped them. Miami whipped Ohio State up front because they have third and fourth year guys who now that's obviously the sweet spot. You want third and fourth year guys who are 5-star prospects that have played a lot of football. Like Miami's got that. So that's what Ohio State has to find. Now they're going to have to get a mix because there's a major need at safety. I think Ohio State arguably needs to bring in a pair of them. Taufik Bayard, who is a safety from Colorado, his brother is Kevin Byard, one of the best safeties in the NFL and for a long time. Kevin Byard, who played for Kerry Combs with the Titans, and there are connections there for Ohio State to maybe try to root out, even though Kerry's now a special teams coach at Michigan, so maybe that'll pay attention there. Who knows? There's a need here. Ohio State has to spend money, but they're not going to spend money just to do it. Like they know what they have to do, but they also know what they can't do, and you can't just throw good money after bad potential, after bad prospects. And I think last year, the transfer portal, because of when Ohio State had to go into it after the season, you see that there was a lot less efficiency and a lot less productivity out of the guys Ohio State had to spend money on because the Buckeyes were forced to spend money late because they didn't have this opportunity now. So, in previous cycles, we saw the Buckeyes be very, very good about where they spent that money in the portal. And then you saw a huge drop off in portal productivity. And I can't help but think it's related to anything other than when they were able to get involved with these kids last year.
Yeah, I mean, you make a good point. It also shows you the risk and the reward and how important those evaluations are. This is not to criticize or pick on Ethan Onianwa, but Ohio State paid 7 figures or
Bo Atkinson, there's a list of these guys from last year.
But if you're looking at where Ohio State lost on Wednesday night, we thought, based on the reputation, based on the NFL grade, based on how much Ohio State spent for Ethan Onianwa and Phillip Daniels, it was addressing a need at tackle. And we thought, well, pencil those guys in there. Austin Sareveld and Luke Montgomery can stay at guard. And then you have Carson Hensman in the middle. That was not the way that Ohio State lined up. So it shows you Ohio State can and will spend, but there is still no guarantee about how that will work out. And maybe you're right that the fact that they're not playing a game right now would lend itself to more success. Who knows? That's not promised. That's not guaranteed. But
it has to, right? I mean, just think about this weekend. Ohio State would not have the ability to have these conversations with Chaz Coleman to the degree they're going to today if they were practicing today, if everything else was going on. So, chaos is a ladder. We've mentioned that before. You certainly would rather be playing a game next week and preparing for a national championship. But, last year, Ryan Day was very clear after the national championship game. The Buckeyes felt they got screwed by the way that the portal thing worked out. So if that's how you felt last year, then you better be willing to pivot and go real, real hard right now to take advantage of this opportunity and to find a silver lining with the way that the season ended.
Yeah, well, that window is open right now. We'll see if they can crack another window of opportunity with the coordinator role and how that's going to work. Either way, the Buckeyes have already landed and signed Cortez Hankton to work with the wide receivers. And who knows, by the time Snap Judgments actually gets into your YouTube or podcast feed, maybe this show will be outdated, kind of like the beat was earlier on Friday morning. But
yeah, maybe the specifics, but not the generalities, not the fun we had along the way.
Well, that's why we didn't scrap the episode entirely. There were still things in there that were relevant. And one thing, most notably, that did change by the time it got out there, which was Cortez Hankton being hired. I did not think that was going to happen in the timeline that it did, but Ryan Day clearly wanted to hit the ground running because there's going to be a lot more things on his plate throughout this January, and we will cover it as much and as thoroughly and as often as we possibly can on Snap Judgments and the beat and everything else, because we're not stopping. And this next couple of weeks is going to be pretty crazy. You can follow along with all of our work there at 97.1 The Fan, 10 TV, 10 TV Plus, Apple, Spotify, Roku, anywhere you get podcasts. And if we need more Snap Judgments, then by God, we will bring them to you. Thanks for joining us. He's Birm. I'm Austin. We'll talk to you later.